welcome to Reel Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. This week I have a special new guest host on the show, Rick Heinichen. Welcome to the show, Rick.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, this is Rick's first time on Real Film Snobs, so a newbie in our ranks, so to speak. And I actually work with Rick, so we work at the same state agency. And when we first met, we started talking movies, and it turns out Rick has a movie podcast as well as a comic book podcast. Why don't you tell us a little bit about those, Rick?
Well, the movie podcast is called Monthly Monday Movie Muckabout, and I have the format of the show is where I have a guest on and I have them watch a movie that they have never seen, but's on their list of movies that they want to see. We find out why they haven't seen it, what do they know about it, and then I have them watch the movie and then we talk about it. And we try to do this once a month and have a different guest on all the time, and it's a lot of fun. I'm glad I had you on recently to do The Public Enemy,
Public Enemy, yeah, it was
which was a
fun.
lot of fun. And so I'm really glad to be back here on this show with you. My other one is a bit more geeky and a bit more, I don't know, a little off the beaten track. My friend and I, we actually read a comic book based on Power Pack, or having a member of Power Pack, which is a group of kids in that were on a team together in the 80s. And we talk about that comic book and we drink a beer and we just have fun. So it's a little bit more of a niche program, but if you like comic books, if you like Marvel comics, if you like listening to two guys discuss beer and comic books, you can check out Unpacking the Power of Power Pack.
I'm not even sure if that's a niche anymore. I would say two guys with beer and comics might be like 80% of the population at this point, anyway, with how Marvel's taking over the world at least. But I'm glad to have you, Rick. Yeah, we had a lot of fun taping the podcast. We did the Public Enemy, and I got some great responses. I talked to a few people who listened to the show, so and really enjoyed it. It was fun, unlike this show, to like go in depth on a movie for a half an hour, whereas with this show we're kind of fast, 4 to 5 minutes per movie. So when Rick and I were discussing what to have on this week's show for his episode, we decided to pick a couple new movies, but then one movie that we'll get to at the very end, which hopefully we have lots of time to discuss. That's actually our mutual favorite, one of our mutual favorite movies of all time, The Apartment, which was my number one favorite of all time. And I understand, Rick, it's also one of your favorites. So can you
Yeah,
tell us about some other favorite movies of yours?
sure thing. I know we're going to get really talking about the apartment a lot, so I'll keep that on the back burner for now. But I have a very eclectic taste in movies. I really prescribe to the maxim that you can't love movies unless you are willing to take the bad movies with the good movies and to really understand what a bad movie is and to really enjoy what a good movie is. So, one of my favorite movies of all time is Highlander. And a lot of people think, wow, what about that movie? I recognize it's a bad movie, but I love it. And I think that's the big thing is if you find a movie that you love, even if you can look at it and say, this is not a good movie, but it speaks to me and I enjoy it, that's okay. It's okay to love a bad movie. It's okay to not like a great movie. It's okay to love what you love. So I like The Apartment. I like The Remains of the Day. I like a lot of the good action films. I like a lot of good tear jerkers. Give me a good sports movie where I'm crying at the end. I'm there for it. I have a good big taste in movies, but I also do think that it really depends upon the day of the week. What's
Hmm.
my favorite movie today? It might not be the same as tomorrow. So it I tend to be all over the board.
Yeah, and it's interesting to watch a movie like there's been ones that I saw when I was younger that I've rewatched and I now like them, but I didn't like them in my 20s.
Yep.
There was things about them I just couldn't appreciate. Something when I was 20 that I now in my 40s are like, oh yeah, that really hits home now. So I think it's often worth rewatching something you maybe really disliked, with the exception of, there's some out there that I think you could probably just avoid. But anyway, so
Yeah.
we've got quite a mix of movies today. A little bit of a serious episode, but we'll just kick it off with our first movie, which is Tar by Todd Field. And this follows the downfall of a renowned composer slash conductor, played by the great Kate Blanchett, named Lydia Tarr. And really just in a tour de force performance by Kate Blanchett. If ever someone probably just needs the Oscar handed to them right now at the podium, it's probably going to go to her for this performance. Where, yes, there's been a lot of buzz. She learned German, she learned French, she learned how to compose, she learned how to conduct, she learned how to play piano. But more importantly, she really digs into this character who is not a likable character by any stretch of the imagination. The Lydia Tarr character is this powerhouse person in the music world who has used her power to her benefit. And in some cases, it turns out, as the movie goes on, maybe to assault or at the very least take advantage of young women who studied under her. But this movie is much more complex than just a simple look at the Me Too movement. It's also about the power dynamics that come into play with large institutions, as we see that people that Lydia Tarr has surrounded herself with, her assistant, even her wife, who are aware of her situation and aware of her behavior, all of a sudden find themselves not accepting her behavior when it doesn't benefit from them anymore. And so it is a long movie. It's over 2.5 hours long, but I absolutely loved it. There's a lot to think about with this movie. It's definitely one that you want to be able to see and then talk to someone afterwards because you might find yourself having a many hour conversation. I'm curious to hear what you thought, Rick.
This movie, at the end of the day, it really disturbed me. I like what you said at the end there, because I went to see it by myself, and I got home and realized I didn't have anybody to talk about it with, because there was a
Hmm.
lot to try to chew into this movie. It is a meal and a half. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to invest in. I found myself revisiting some scenes that I just didn't understand at the time and replaying in my mind and finally making the connection with what they were going with it. I, at times, I felt like the film kept on adding additional layers, additional layers, additional layers, and I didn't feel that it really helped get us to the ending point or getting to what they wanted us to know about.
Hmm.
After a little bit more reviewing in my head, I'm thinking, well, it does inform other parts of the film. I'm kind of thinking of near the end of the film when she is looking at her choice of a masseuse and she finds it disturbing. I finally realized she was standing there in front of an orchestra about ready to conduct, and she was finding her next victim. And that's when it
Hmm.
occurred to her. So it's things like that that all of a sudden occur to me as I'm watching this film, and just realizing how much of a disturbing and creepy character she really had. But there was
Oh
other
yeah,
pieces of the
big
film
time.
that I still want to know why it was in there. I didn't know why they had her go through the maze underground when she's chasing the Russian. I still don't know if that Russian cello player was a real character or was just a figment of her imagination, or I'm not sure where she fits into everything in there.
Or is
So
she the one from the very beginning? Because
yeah.
time is really big. She talks about that as a conductor, how time is
Hmm.
essential. And we don't know the scenes we see at the beginning when she's on the plane and we see someone is texting about her
That's
and photo
right.
and video. We don't know who that is. We assume later on that it's her main assistant. But then later, as I realized, because you see the Russian cello player on her phone a lot, I wondered,
Hmm.
oh, was this actually something that happened later in terms of the time continuum. And she's the one the whole time that's been very critical of her and documenting her.
And maybe she's the one who helps to move the abuse allegations forward, and she's the one who's
Hmm.
documented behind. She may be working in tandem with the assistant, and this is all a plant. I was thinking that too. So that, like I said, there's a lot to go in with this film,
It's a
and
lot to unpack. It's huge. We
it's a
could do like
lot.
an hour just talking about the movie, honestly. And I know we don't have that, but I guess what I appreciated, besides Blanchett's, of course, amazing
Oh
performance,
yeah.
is that it doesn't take a simplistic view of things like power and dynamics and assault charges. It's not simplistic at all because you see, I remember when the Weinstein thing happened, one of the things that people kept talking about over and over is how did this go on for so long and no one said anything? Surely lots of people in Hollywood saw it happening for years around them. And you really see in the case of this movie, all these people Lydia surrounded herself with really kind of looking the other way while it benefits them. The assistant is waiting because she wants this position as her backup conductor,
Hmm.
right? Her wife even says to her at one point, I looked the other way until it affects our family, right?
Right.
So everyone has their reasons for kind of like, look at the conductor that she's mentoring, the one who wants her notes on the Mahler
Hmm.
symphony. He also is guilty of this because he wants her brain, he wants her input on his work. So there's all these people who need things from her to also elevate themselves. So I just thought it was
And
really, yeah, really interesting movie.
and it's the question of what we as the public, or we as the consumer of the artist's talent, what we will put up with as well.
Hmm.
How much are we going to accept Bill Cosby and everything he's given us until it's too much? When's that tipping point? And we've seen
Right,
it with
which the
you.
film really gets at, right?
Yeah,
Because things keep happening and then there's a tipping point, but it takes a while, right?
yeah.
So yeah.
And I just want to point out one thing too on the overall picture of what we're going to talk about today. I finally realized that we do have a lot of films that all speak to each other. we could really argue that we have characters in all these films, the main character that we don't necessarily like. And
Mm.
I think that's true about everybody in all of the films we're going to talk about. And I think it's an interesting through line that we've kind of gathered here or kind of cultivated
Okay,
in
well,
our
that will be an
choices.
interesting. That's a way to sell the show, Rick. So this is the episode where we have unlikable main characters. So
Exactly.
for those who don't like that, yeah. So okay, well, we should move on to the next movie. So I'll let you introduce All Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah. All Quiet on the Western Front is a new version of the 1929 novel by Eric Maria Remarque. And I'm sorry if I totally butchered that name. This is the third film with this name following the Academy Award winning 1930s version and the 1979 television version. The plot centers on Paul Baumer, a 17-year-old student who enlists in the Imperial German Army against his parents' wishes and with the encouragement of his three school friends. Quickly, the shine of nationalist pride is dulled as they are pushed into the front line of World War I trench warfare. The terror and horror of the Great War quickly overwhelm the boys, and the meat grinder style of fighting takes each of their lives. The film is a brutal and honest view of the coldness and death of war. And by the end of it, we are left with nobody living, which, let's face it, that tends to be how war tends to operate, especially a lot of the conventional warfare that we have seen in the past.
I curious what you thought of the movie, Rick. Did you like it?
I It's hard. This is one of these movies that's hard to say if you like or not. I think on a whole, I did enjoy it. I thought it was artistically just beautiful. I mean, it's a fantastic film to look at. It's a fantastic film to listen to. The story is set out in front of you in such graphic and horrific details. You can't
Hmm.
help but become invested in the lives of these characters and just almost looking at it and saying, I'm not really seeing Germany in World War One. I'm seeing every single war movie I've ever seen in my life. It's a fantastic movie, but it is a tough, tough pill to
It is
swallow.
very graphic. I will just say that up front.
Yes.
And I've seen lots of war movies, so I will say that even with having seen that, what I really liked about it is that it really got to the fact how young these kids were. They cast actors that look, the Paul character is 17 years old when he
Mhm.
enlists, and he looks about 17. And it is hard to watch. I mean, it's not like when you watch Saving Private Ryan, you're like, oh, it's great that Tom Hanks and all these guys are getting shot up. But it is hard to watch people that look like boys essentially being set out to slaughter. And they're so inexperienced and they're fumbling with their weapons, and which was actually the truth of what happened. I mean, World
Yep.
War One, the Germans were running out of boys to put on the front line. They just kept sending more and more out, and younger, and they were basically lambs to the slaughter. And that really strikes home in this movie. I know the original is very acclaimed and it is a great film, but it actually isn't one that I minded that they updated for current times
Yep.
because it is such an old film. It's from the 30s, and this one is made by Germans, and so it has that perspective as well. There's a little bit of anti-French feeling in the movie,
Yeah.
but overall, I really felt like it was about the horrors of war and how
Yeah.
these young kids were just not equipped to face this reality that they went in thinking it was going to be, I guess, like some fun, and like you said, like oh, we're going to go in and we're going to be the heroes of the day, and they were very naive. And then the first thing they're doing is they're stuck in these trenches where they're just getting bombarded.
But even before that, we get the wonderful scene of seeing a soldier getting shot, his clothes being taken off, washed clean, repaired, and then sent back over to be given to the new soldiers going back out, ripping off the tag because, oh, there's still a name tag on it. Oh, that must be a mistake. They rip it off and it joins all the other tags that they've ripped off on the floor. You know what's going to happen. It shows you in the first scene that nobody's coming out of this alive.
Yeah.
The fascinating thing I saw about this film that I really wanted to mention is there's a lot of scenes which you can see were prototypes in the original story, in the original movie, which have become standard fare for a lot of the war movies we see now. You can see Platoon, you can see Apocalypse Now, you can see every single war movie you have ever seen. There are scenes that are lifted wholesale out of All Quiet from the Western Front and put into those movies because we know it. We know what this song is. And the fact that we have this movie coming out and it still is fresh, it still feels fresh, it still feels like it's telling a new story. It's almost sad that we know what the song is on this.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the
Uh,
reasons the book itself hasn't dated, really. He wrote it about World War One, but it's
mhm.
just as relevant today. And at the time, the author was accused of it being a pacifist a novel, and he said it's not pacifism, it's just what I really experienced
Yep.
in World War I. And he said I saw a lot of young boys sent out to be slaughtered who weren't prepared for that. And you also have to remember, one thing I was talking about with my family is World War I is also a very interesting war in that it was post a lot of and post industrial revolution. So
Hmm.
you had for the first time things like machine guns and artillery, I can't even say tanks.
Artillery.
Yes, yeah, you had this like modern warfare, but you didn't have things like penicillin yet or modern medicine. So you have people literally just dying from, infections, and you see that in the movie as well. And so it's really was one of the wars that had the most casualties of any war in history, partially because of that dynamic of the horribleness of modern warfare combined with the fact that they really, you basically, got a scratch, you were dead almost. I mean, it's really horrific. We're really selling this one, I know, but
Really quickly, my wife watched about three-fourths of this movie with me before she just tapped out. She couldn't handle it anymore. But made the comment to her as we saw the tank coming onto the battlefield, how amazing and horrific that must have been for somebody who'd never seen something like that coming towards them on a battlefield.
right, the first time they've seen some of these
Yeah.
machines before. Yeah, incredible. So I really do recommend it, especially
Yes,
for
I do too.
people that are fans of war films. I would just say be prepared. It's you might need to take a break in between too. It is a long movie. So anyway, we should move on to our next
Yeah.
one.
Manchurian Candidate, and this is from 1962. This is a classic film, the story of Raymond Shaw, an absolutely unlovable and bitter man who hates his father-in-law and despises his mother, a domineering and controlling woman. Shaw returns from the Korean War as a war hero. He saved his unit from an attack and is known now as the most wonderful, caring, and honorable man any of the soldiers have ever known. The captain of the unit, Bennett Marco, begins to have bizarre dreams, and it is eventually revealed that they all were brainwashed. Raymond is now a weapon that can be used by his American handler, his mother, in order for her to meet her political goals. I am a big fan of this movie. I've always enjoyed it. I love our Frank Sinatra in this role. It's just amazing to see him putting every ounce of acting talent he's got on the screen for this role, and just how the film was constructed with some interesting cuts, some interesting ways of shooting the film. The scenes with them being brainwashed and how it tends to transfer into different people, different characters, representing the different people who they think are there. The scene that is brainwashed into the soldiers that they think they're at a tea party that's being hosted by this women's auxiliary group, and depending upon if it's an African American soldier or a white soldier, they're seeing different people, and just the inconsistencies of the story and the unreliable narration of what occurs. And of course, Angela Lansbury as the mother. Oh, chef's kiss. Just amazing role, just an amazing tour de force in this performance, just selling every single scene. So,
Yes, and she's one of the great reasons to see this movie. And we did this course, we were talking, and she just passed away recently, and we thought, everyone knows Angela Lansbury as the nice woman on Murder She Wrote, but you can see her acting range when you see this movie because she is vicious. I mean, she is
vicious.
the instrument of power. Her husband is just this doof, right? This doofus guy who she's controlling because she knows she can. Now, of course, the film, it came out in 1962. It's Cold War era, so it's got these some might say dated references. It's, of course, very, very, jingoistic in a way, very anti-communist. The Asian characters are not well portrayed necessarily, neither are the Russians. So it is a film of its time in that way. But they're great performances, and Frank Sinatra really, often not always appreciated as being the great actor because, he was mainly known as a singer. But when he went all in on a performance, he actually could really deliver, and he does so in this movie because he's in this weird position where he's just thinking something is not right, but he can't put his finger on it for a good chunk of the movie. He's just like, all I know is I know this guy, right? That Shaw is a terrible guy, and I disliked it. But all I can think is that he's the warmest, most generous person I've ever met. And so it's just, it's really kind of just for the time, apparently, just the way they filmed it. John Frankenheimer, the director, makes it very unsettling.
Hmm.
The sequences where they're being brainwashed when they're, flashing back to that, it's got almost kind of I wouldn't necessarily psychedelic, but just very disorienting effect.
They keep changing that scene. I really noticed it this time. They're 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 been brainwashed, and they're being presented in front of a room of communist party members, and you've got
Hmm.
Chinese, Russian, uh, Korean, and you've got all these people in this room, and it's very set up in a very kind of standard, think of UN type of a thing. But then the brainwashed kind of fantasy that the soldiers are seeing is this garden party where all these women are sitting on these chairs in a very
Hmm.
open room. And every scene, you are seeing a different setup that somehow mixes and matches the characters and the scenes. So all of a sudden you have all these generals sitting in this garden party area. And then you have another
Right.
scene where all the women are sitting in this more, somber kind of place. And it goes back and forth, and it just plays with your expectations the entire time. It's a fascinating movie, and it's also interesting. I need to point out too, even though it was filmed back then and deals with communism, there are a few lines in this film that that you listen to and are saying, "Hey, I've heard this recently from current politicians,"
Hmm.
and that is the scariest part of this movie.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's very interesting because the Angela Lansbury character and her husband are patriot crusaders.
Uh-huh.
They're out there trying to hunt down communists, at least in theory. And it turns out they have an insidious plan behind it all. But it's just a really great movie, and remade it. One of Jonathan Demme's rare failings. I don't know what made him think this was a good movie to remake, but they remade it to try to update it, and the remake's not great, but the original is great. Angela Lansbury, for that reason alone, I suggest watching it for sure. So okay, so we'll move on to our next movie because I know we're really excited to talk about this one. The Apartment from 1960, directed by the great Billy Wilder. The movie starts Jack Lemmon as an office clerk who tries to get ahead in the business world by letting executives use his apartment for their extramarital affairs. And that is all well and good until one of the people using his apartment happens to be the elevator girl, played by a fantastic Shirley MacLaine, who he has quite a crush on. So, and she is having an affair with Fred McMurray, who, if people, Fred McMurray is such an interesting career. He did TV where he played, the dad on TV shows and did these characters, but then he also plays one of probably the creepiest characters in history in this movie. He's just a real sleazeball. So you really get a sense of his range when you're watching this movie. This movie is my favorite movie of all time, my number one favorite movie of all time. It's one that I rewatch every year. I have a poster of it in my entertainment room. And there's so many reasons I love this movie. Billy Wilder in general, I'm a big fan of him as a director. Some Like It Hot is also another great film of his that could easily be in my top 20. Jack Lemmon is one of my favorite actors of all time. And you mentioned at the beginning of the show, Rick, that this was an episode in some ways about unlikable characters.
Mhm.
I wouldn't say he's at the Lydia Tarr level, but I would say he becomes likable as the movie goes on. But Jack Lemmon's character is, he's trying to get ahead in the business world, and he's willing to kind of look the other way and let these executives use his apartment for their romantic affairs. And as long as he gets ahead with it, and it's kind of gross if you think about it, like what's going on in his own apartment. But he has this great chemistry with Shirley MacLaine, two actors you wouldn't think of necessarily putting together. That I think really makes for the movie. The whole cast has this chemistry that's just to die for.
Yeah, I love this movie, and rewatching it for the show, my wife was watching with me, and she looked over at me at the end and said, "Are you crying?" I said, "Yes, I am. Just leave me alone."
Yes.
I love
Every
this.
time at the end, every
Yeah,
time at
I
the
can't
end.
help it. I can't help it. Jack Lemmon does such a great job in this, and I recently
Shut up and
covered.
deal.
Yeah,
Shut up and deal, right?
I recently covered this, and it's going to be an episode coming out. And the person I showed it to was looking at it with modern sensibilities, and they are seeing it with a modern eye set. And they pointed out to me that, yeah, this guy's not a good guy, and a lot of the characters in this are just not good people. And it's really hard pill to swallow, especially looking in modern eyes. Like, why didn't he stand up more? And, look at the time period and look what he was doing. Really, if we are being very critical, Jack Lemmon's character Bud is doesn't make a really good choice until the final moment of the film, when
Hmm.
he finally just tells Fred McMurray to shove the job. I don't need it. I don't need you. I am not going to be this person. I'm going to be a mensch. And
Hmm.
that's a final moment, and it is the final seconds of this film before he finally becomes that good person. And he finally realizes he can't sell his morals anymore. He made it to the top, but he is not going to sell his morals anymore, even if it cost him everything he fought for. So it's a hard movie, and it's a fascinating movie because You look when this was made, 1960s, and the just what it's talking about, the affairs, the dirty dealings, the using women as property back in 1960s, and this is Academy Award winning film. That is progressive and that is amazing, and that's something to be celebrated. Even though there are some parts of this film that look at it today going, whew, whew, we can't make this today at all.
No, well, no, you couldn't, but it also is of its time. And,
Yeah.
it's in some ways it's very relevant still because, he's trying to get away ahead in the workplace. And this is the way that he has. I love the opening shot where they show him. Wilder shows this huge corporate behemoth, monolith, just all these people sitting there typing away, and they're just like widgets, right? And he's just one of them. He's a low guy on the totem pole. He's just a clerk, and he's trying to not just be a clerk, and he's trying to figure out, what do I have to give me an advantage? Well, I have this apartment that I can loan out to people. Maybe it's conveniently located. They never get into the detail of that, but it seems like that's part of the thing. And Shirley MacLaine is so good because she's not just the hapless woman, in some ways, she's fallen for this guy who's really bad. And so you kind of get frustrated, but she comes off as so smart, she doesn't come
Mhm.
off as just some like ditzy broad, so to speak, quote unquote, using that term like for the time period. She doesn't come off as some ditzy girl who's just getting taken advantage of by these men. She's literally a woman in a bad situation. She's fallen for the wrong guy, but she just gives a terrific performance.
Everybody this does. Ray Walston, sorry, Shirley MacLaine, Fred McMurray, Jack Christian, everybody gives it their all in this film. Billy Wilder just goes out and gets the best performances, gets the best shots, and makes this film timeless in some ways. Very, very hard movie to watch. It's not the funny, ha ha one,
Hmm.
even though it's got some good moments in it.
It is very funny in parts. The
It's got
spaghetti
fun,
with the
but
tennis racket, come on,
yeah,
that's a classic scene.
it's got some good parts in there, right? And a lot of even hard movies to watch, you can find some real good comedy parts. But overall, this movie deals with suicide attempts, infidelity, just some horrible men. And
Hmm.
at the same time, I can't help but love this, and I can't help but
Hmm.
see the little bit of hope that does exist in there for a beautiful friendship, for a beautiful relationship with two people who are just trying to make it in the world. And I
Yeah.
think that's the bit that I really do like.
Yeah, they become good friends, and there's a mutual respect there at the end. So that really comes across at the end. So I love it. I know you love it. I was excited to get to talk to you about it because not that many other people other than, I mean, a lot of people I know that have seen it like it, but very few people hold it in the high esteem that you and I do, I think. So and partly I think it's because they haven't seen it. I think once they see it, if they have any taste, they'll like it. So anyway. Well, thank you, Rick, for joining me on the show. Once again, this has been Real Film Snobs. You can check us out on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe. We're also on Facebook, and we have a podcast. We're on CCTV or CC Media, I should say, in Salem, Scan TV in Silverton, Corvallis Access Media, KMUZ Radio, KMWV Radio. Thank you for watching. Have a great day and great movies. Bye bye.